What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to College Football Talk with Peter Burnett. In today's episode, I'm breaking down the Week 12 action. There were a lot of important games, big games to go over. So I'm going to go over all that. There was also a big announcement in the coaching carousel. So I'll talk about that as well briefly to get this episode started. But before I get into all that, if you go on to enjoy this video and want to see more content like this, please feel free to consider leaving a like. Consider subscribing to the channel and turn on those post notifications so you're always up to date whenever I upload. As I record this on Tuesday morning, early afternoon actually now, the biggest storyline is James Franklin being hired by Virginia Tech. I think this is potentially a home run hire for Virginia Tech. They became a program of national prominence under Frank Beamer, who was a really successful coach for them, Beamer ball, defensive, all those sorts of things. James Franklin has kind of a different philosophy to that, but I think he's the best fit. He was the guy who, when Franklin was fired, I didn't say that he'd be the right guy for the job when Virginia Tech fired Brent Pry, but I did think when Franklin got fired, his best bet would be to go to Virginia Tech. I think this is a program steeped in history, like Penn State is, maybe not quite as high of expectations. And that also, I think that kind of gives him an opportunity to vault that program into college football playoff contention. I think it's also not too surprising just regionally. You know, his two other head coaching positions were at Vanderbilt, who's down there in Nashville, Tennessee. Then you go up to State College, and now you kind of meet somewhere a little bit in the middle. You know, you're still going to kind of tap into that DMV recruiting in the Baltimore and Washington, D.C. area. And you're also going to be able to kind of tap in a little bit, I think, to the South. You're going to be going up against competitors in the ACC. I think it's also a conference that right now is kind of up for the taking. You know, Georgia Tech's the top dog this season. It's been Clemson for the last decade, but it seems to be kind of in a transition period. I think this is the perfect opportunity for James Franklin going into Virginia Tech. But let me know if you want more thoughts on that hire. I'll leave it at that for now because I want to go into this Week 12 action. But I think it's a home run hire for Virginia Tech. I think it's also a home run destination for James Franklin. Kind of probably a step up from where Vanderbilt was at when he was there. A slight step down from Penn State, but with the opportunity to get this Hokies program right where he had the Nittany Lions. Going over the Week 12 games, though, Georgia was gutsy with their play calling in a 35-10, pretty dominant, comfortable win over Texas. They had that 4th and 1 conversion at their own 36, and then after they go down to finish that drive with a score, Kirby Smart elects to go with an onside kick. That quickly turned a game that was 14-10, shifting into Texas's favor. Who knows where the game goes from there? Texas had just scored. Georgia has an opportunity there. 4th and 1 on their side of the field. You're giving Texas a short field from the 36 or maybe even closer to the goal line. Instead, they go down, they finish the drive with the score by converting on that play, and then they also score after the onside kick. So gutsy play calling for Kirby Smart and the Bulldogs, and really high caliber execution as well. Texas's offense continued to struggle in this one. Georgia's pass rush got home several times, 3 sacks in the game, forced Arch Manning to a 27-for-43 day with an interception. On the flip side, the other quarterback, Gunnar Stockton, to me, is proving that he's not only a grinder. We saw that when he came in relief for Carson Beck in the SEC championship game last year, but he's also a winner. They have that one loss this season to Alabama, but outside of that, this Georgia team has found a way to win football games. It's like Joel Klatt has talked about this a couple times now on his show. It's like what Max Duggan did at TCU in 2022. He's a similar play style of quarterback. He doesn't throw the ball a ton, but he's efficient when he does, and he also is able to run the ball a little bit as well. He was 24 for 29 for 229 yards, 4 touchdowns, and just 1 interception. For me, Georgia, after the way that Texas A&M struggled a little bit, and obviously Alabama dropping their game to Oklahoma, I'll talk more about those games here in a second, Georgia puts themselves, I think, as the best team in the SEC, and they might not even get to the conference championship game, but right now, I think the Bulldogs are the best team in the SEC. Continuing on in the SEC, it was a strong, pretty stellar performance for the Oklahoma defense and special teams on the way to a huge 23-21 win over Alabama in Tuscaloosa. That's obviously has been, and I think still is, a tough place to go in and win Oklahoma does that. I mean, let's go through kind of some of those key plays on either special teams or defense. They have a 49-yard punt return that leads to a field goal in the first quarter. Eli Bowen gets an 87-yard pick six. Pressure was on that play by Kip Lewis, who finished with 2 sacks in the game. Bowen goes 87 yards for a pick six for a 10-0 lead. Then Ryan Williams fumbles on a punt return. Oklahoma recovers. John Mateer runs in a touchdown to make it 17-7. And then Taylor Wine's strip sack fumble was huge in the fourth quarter. Alabama had actually gone ahead 21-20, but Ween gets the strip sack there. Oklahoma goes down and scores the go-ahead field goal, and then they also get a clutch turnover on downs, a clutch fourth down stop there late in the fourth quarter to put the game away. Again, big game for Kip Lewis overall for the Oklahoma defense. Eli Bowen, I think, also had 5 tackles in the game. I believe they got home for maybe 4 total sacks. Again, Lewis had 2 of those. Alabama passed the ball pretty well. Ty Simpson threw for 326 yards, I think 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Obviously that pick six, but they only ran for 80. That's something that Clad has talked about as well, that this Crimson Tide team is very one-dimensional. They've got a talented running back in J.M. Miller, but it just seems like whether it's the offensive line or the way that he reads the line of scrimmage or something is not, or even if it's just a play calling, something is not working for Alabama in running the ball, and that continued this week. For Oklahoma, the defense kind of had to carry them. John Mateer did not have a great game. He had passed for only 138 yards, and as a team, they only ran for 74. Now, I will say, part of that is simply due to the fact that they didn't have the ball a whole lot, and they had shorter fields even when they did. But I do think it is kind of worth noting that they didn't move the ball a ton in this game. So that's kind of something to watch. I think, though, with home games against Mizzou and against LSU to finish the regular season, those are both 2 games that I think they'll certainly be favored to win. I think 10-2 is not just a realistic possibility. I think it's the likely scenario now for the Sooners. And they also hold that all-important tiebreaker over Alabama if it gets into that territory where, maybe one team is number 10 and one team is number 11. It kind of comes down to that chopping block, because unless Georgia Tech goes and beats Georgia, they're probably going to steal a bit, or whoever wins the ACC, and then you're obviously going to have that group of 6 team as well. So things are very much kind of up in the air, but a huge win for Oklahoma. Staying in the SEC, Texas A&M stormed back. I think it's the biggest comeback in program history, from 30-3 down at halftime for a 31-30 win. Marcel Reed didn't have his best game in the first half, but really put things together. He finished with 439 passing yards and 3 touchdowns in spite of 2 interceptions and a fumble lost. The Aggies scored 28 points in 20 minutes of game time, kept their hopes alive. Again, I think a performance like this, some people are going to say that maybe they're not as good as Georgia. I think this is a win that very kind of epitomized what Georgia had been doing, kind of coming back in games from an even greater deficit. Those 2 teams, I'd love to see them match up in the SEC championship game. Obviously, Alabama holds the tiebreaker over Georgia, so I think, since it was their first loss in conference play, the Crimson Tide would have to lose again to Auburn. That would probably knock them out of the playoff hunt. It would also send Georgia to the SEC championship game. Shifting gears over to a few other top 15 teams, Notre Dame, BYU, Utah, all earned pretty dominant wins over, I think, teams that were pretty decent. You could even say good. Notre Dame over Pitt, BYU over a solid TCU team, and Utah on the road in what's usually a fairly tough place to play at Baylor in Waco. Then looking at the Big Ten, USC rallied to win a very Iowa-style game, 26-21 over the Hawkeyes. Jaden Maiava did throw the ball pretty well in this one, 254 passing yards and a touchdown. Mekhi Lemon is looking like, outside of Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate, probably one of the best, if not the best, wide receiver, probably number 3 in the country, maybe behind those 2 in the country. He had 153 receiving yards and a touchdown. The Trojans trailed 21-7 in the second quarter, and then they scored 19 points in about a 20-minute period from 3.5 minutes left in the second quarter to 13.5 minutes left in the fourth. So a big win for USC. They've got a road game in Eugene against Oregon this coming week. That game is huge. If they win that one, then all they got left is UCLA. I think that's a very winnable game. in spite of kind of the buzz that UCLA produced when interim head coach Tim Skipper and offense coordinator Jerry Neuheisel took over. That's kind of died down a little bit. Part of that is due to quality of opposition. But I think if USC can win on the road at Oregon next week, I think that makes them a lock for the college football playoff. Now, that's a big if. That's going to be a really tough place to go in and win. But if the Trojans can pull it off, they will, I think, be bound for the college football playoff. Staying in the Big Ten, Michigan survives against Northwestern in a pretty kind of classic football game at Wrigley Field. A really cool environment for the game. Michigan, it was ugly. They had 5 turnovers in the game or lost the turnover battle by 5. They also really struggled kicking the ball. One of the top kickers going into the season, Dominic Zavada, continued to struggle. He missed 2 field goals, but he did come back to hit the game winner. Kind of similarly, Bryce Underwood had some struggles in this game and then made some key important plays, including a really difficult pass on their game-winning field goal drive. So Michigan survives. Again, they're setting up for that regular season finale against number 1 Ohio State. And you look at the kind of injury concerns for the Buckeyes. They routed UCLA this past week, but Carnell Tate didn't play at all. He continues to deal with a leg injury, I think calf specifically. And then Jeremiah Smith seemed a little shaken up as well, and I think missed most of the second half in that game. So that'll be something interesting to watch, because when Ohio State tried to run the ball last year, we all know how that turned out for the Buckeyes. So they're going to really hope that those guys can get back healthy for that game so they can pass the ball. I think that's what they're going to need to do this year, not try to beat the Wolverines at their own game. But that's a game I'll talk about more in depth, obviously, coming up here in a couple weeks. Going over to let's go Big 12 first real quick. One quick takeaway. Cincinnati kind of choked against Arizona. Really good game for Noah Fifita. He's, I think, one of the most underrated quarterbacks. He's had his struggles here and there. I'll definitely mention that. But I think when he's playing his best football, I think he's a really solid quarterback. He leads them to a win over the Bearcats. But all hope is not lost yet for the Bearcats. They're still going to play BYU this coming week, a game that obviously I'll preview in depth because it's a pretty slow week. So I'll probably maybe go a little deeper into this game and obviously that USC-Oregon game. But that's a big one coming up for Cincinnati. They still have their Big 12 hopes in front of them, but they are certainly more on a downward trajectory than an upward trajectory. Finally, in the Power 4, looking over the ACC, Georgia Tech survives at Boston College, 36-34, with a go-ahead game-winning field goal with 11 seconds left. Louisville on Friday night pretty much threw away their college football playoff hopes. I think they're still in contention maybe to make the ACC championship game, but they lose 20-19 at home to Clemson. Good win for the Tigers. We'll see where if Dabo is still their coach at the end of the season. And then Miami routs NC State, a team that had given some other teams in the ACC some issues this year. Miami takes care of business and routs them, and they keep themselves in the discussion as well. Big game coming up in the ACC this week as well. It's going to be Georgia Tech against Pitt, and then obviously Miami goes to Pitt in the regular season finale. So Hurricanes at Panthers, either way is going to be an important one. Even if Pitt loses this one to Georgia Tech as well, it's still going to be an important game, especially for Miami. Finally, looking over the group of 6, James Madison right now is looking like maybe the top team because once again, a ranked group of 6 team fell this week. This time it was South Florida, number 24 in the country, falling in a shootout to Navy, a 41-38 win for the midshipmen. Eli Heidenreich became the Navy's all-time leading receiver. Big game for him. Big game, obviously, as well for Blake Horvath, passing and running the ball. And the midshipmen, again, win a shootout there. They put themselves at the front of the line in the American. They're 6-1. They're going to have a key game this coming week, I think, at Memphis. And then after that, their game against Army is a non-conference game. So they'll either be 7-1 and likely tiebreakers here are going to be interesting, so keep an eye on that. But 7-1 should get them into the ACC American Conference Championship game. But then behind them, Tulane is 5-1. North Texas, who owns the tiebreaker over Navy head-to-head, and East Carolina. All 3 of those teams are 5-1. And shout out to the Pirates. They pillaged Memphis this week, 31-27. Caden Hauser threw a late go-ahead touchdown pass with 1:08 left in the fourth. And the Pirates are very much in contention for the conference title. South Florida still is at 4-2, but they're going to need 3 of those 4 teams that I mentioned to lose and finish with 2 losses. And then after that, we'll see what the tiebreaker is. But I think the only 2 teams out of those that play each other down this final stretch is Navy at Memphis. I don't think any of those other teams play each other. They all have pretty reasonably easy slates. So if Navy wins and those other 3 teams win their 2 games that I'd expect them to win, it'll be interesting to see what the tiebreakers are. It's kind of crazy if it's a 4-way tie atop the American Conference. It'll be interesting to see who ends up going to that conference championship game. And I think a win in that game by any of those 4 teams, except maybe ECU because of their overall record, probably vaults them over James Madison. But again, it's going to be really interesting to see who ends up getting into the American Conference Championship game. Maybe after next week, I'll dive into those tiebreakers as much as I can see. It's probably going to come down to maybe record against common opponents because they haven't all played each other. But again, stay tuned maybe for that. I'll try to start digging into that a little bit and let you guys know what kind of the scenarios are, I guess, for getting to the American Conference Championship game. But that's all for this episode of College Football Talk. If there's anything really interesting, I might make a reaction video to the new college football playoff rankings. Otherwise, Oklahoma, where they rank will be important. Where Texas is ranked, I would have them with 3 losses, probably out of college football playoff contention. A win over Texas A&M, though, I think is something that could give them a vault back into the field. But those are my thoughts kind of on week 12 of the college football season. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of this past week. But that's all for this episode of College Football Talk. I'm your host, Peter Burnett, signing out. Peace.